could come out and be working in my grave if I want to be able to survive.
Good afternoon. We're just getting the audio visual set up. Hi, my name is Lee Munsell. I'm the editor-in-chief of the San Antonio Report. I'm so grateful that all of you could be here today for Drought Meets Development, Balancing Growth and Water Conservation in the Hill Country, which is an event put on by the San Antonio Report and a panel discussion on really important, crucial water issues in our Hill Country. I just want to give a quick thank you to our generous sponsors and exhibitors, the Edwards Aquifer Authority, the Nature Conservancy, the John and Florence Newman Foundation, Katie and Ted Flato, Raba Kistner, the San Antonio River Authority, and Credit Human. Thank you so much for your help today. We also want to give a special thanks as digital attendants, and these videos will live on our website as well as on Facebook and YouTube so that you talk about the issues that are so important in our community, and this is what we're all about, becoming a member of the San Antonio Report to support our work. I know you're all here to hear the conversation that we're about to have, so I've our utilities, energy, and environment.
So I'm really excited for this conversation today. We're going to be talking about the Hill Country and where development and growth meet the environment. So known for its picturesque views of gently rolling hills and pristine spring-fed waterways, the Texas Hill Country is no longer a secret as the region's popularity and population grow. The clash between the state's growth and its water issues is hard to ignore there, as both native and transplant residents are looking for homes in Central Texas faster than housing stock can keep pace. Meanwhile, by 2070, Texas is projected to face a water shortage that could add up to an estimated $153 billion in annual economic losses statewide, according to the Texas Water Development Board. As homebuilders head for the hills, environmental advocates are pushing to see development proceed in an eco-conscious manner that protects the area's natural water resources and wildlife. My name is Lindsay Carnett. As my boss said, I'm the environment reporter for the San Antonio Report. And then joining me today to discuss how the growth strikes balance between growth and environment are our panelists. Our first one I'd like to invite up is Amy Hardberger. Amy is the director of the Texas Tech Center for Water Law and Policy and a SALS trustee. I'd also like to invite up Catherine Romans, the executive director of the Hill Country Alliance. Thank you for joining us, Catherine. Roland Ruiz, the general manager of the Edwards Aquifer Authority. Roland, thank you for being here. And Andrea Wiesian, commissioner of the Kendall County. She represents Precinct 2. And Charlie Hill, president and COO of DH Investments. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I'm really happy that you all are here. So first, I just want to give you each a chance to tell us a little bit about what you each do and how it relates to water security in Texas, which is our supplies of water and how stocked we are with that for the future. So I want to kick it off by giving the mic here to Charlie. So Charlie, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you relate to water issues in Texas.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks for having us and getting everybody together. I think it'll be an interesting dialogue. Again, I'm Charlie Hill with DH Investment Company. And we are a developer of master plan communities in Central Texas. One I'm here to talk about today is Cordillera Ranch. It's located in Bernie, or just east of Bernie, in Kendall County. Started the development in the late 90s. I think that one of the things that I could share that how we tie to water conservation and water planning and development in the Hill Country is when we started that community in the late 90s, the county regulations there would have actually allowed us to develop at one lot for 2 acres. But, and credit, my father started the company back in the 80s, credit to him, they, in their planning, went out and did test wells in that area where the community was going to be developed. And those test wells revealed we really couldn't be sustainable at one lot for 2 acres. So I know it's surprising to hear a developer say they actually curtailed and restricted themselves greater than the local regulations, but we greatly reduced our planned density for the community to the first few phases. We're kind of averaging 5-acre home sites in there versus what we could have done at 2-acre home sites. And then to quickly fast forward, in the origins of the community were just over 4,000 acres, and it was a family ranch that we were friends with the family that had owned it for many years, and partnering with them was the plan, and they and we had a sentimental attachment to the property and wanted to see it developed in a way that preserved the character, the look and feel of the nature there in the ranch. And so we really wanted to impose a lot of things that were going to preserve the wildlife corridors. We have on each home site a native vegetation preserve around each home site, so you can only impact a very minimal footprint on these acreage estates. And then also mention the lower density in the community. And then I know we're going to probably go back and forth, so I'm not going to share all the things, but also further into development, worked with Guadalupe Blanco River Authority to, when they were building their Western Canyon pipeline, to be a part of that, which brought water to Kendall County from Canyon Lake, surface water supply. So starting in the early 2000s, when that was built, the home sites that we developed thereafter were not served with individual wells. They were served through that surface water supply source, which at full build out will greatly reduce the amount of groundwater that community is impacting in that area. So there's a few little highlights. Won't bore with the rest right now. I'll pass the mic.
Thank you. As Lindsay mentioned, my name is Amy Hardberger. I'm a law professor at Texas Tech, and I'm also the director of their Center for Water Law Policy. And I guess as a sort of intro remark, if the developer side is the tree, I'm sort of the forest. I guess I'm here. A lot of my work is looking at sort of the big picture water sustainability, water planning, and water pricing. I've been in that space for, I don't want to say how long now because it's got double digits. And so, a lot, interestingly, or maybe not interestingly, my background is actually geology, and my master's thesis for hydrogeology was in Kendall County. So I was originally asked by Kendall County commissioners to provide a sort of an ideal lot space for recharge issues. And my thesis advisor, who unfortunately just recently passed away, said, we are not wading into that politics as part of your master's thesis, but that is essentially what I was studying, was recharge response to rainfall in Kendall County. So that was 20 plus years ago, so the writing was on the wall a long time ago. It's not a surprise that people have discovered this beautiful place. So, and it's really about, a lot of my work is multidisciplinary. So I am a lawyer, but my work is really where science, economics, and land use planning sort of collide with real water issues, the science and how much water is there. And one of the challenges for the hill country, as well as all places, and I'm sure you'll hit on this as well, is the nature functions as a system. So we're here in San Antonio talking about the hill country. If you think, well, I don't really ever go to the hill country, why do I care? It has direct impacts to San Antonio's water source. Many of these people are living and working in San Antonio and living and commuting in. So these are our very close cousins, if you want to think of it that way. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, with the conversation and how we're going to move forward is the law does not recognize systems well. We love to draw boundaries. We love to say, okay, well, that's the county line, that's the city limit, that's the Edwards Aquifer, that's the jurisdiction of this is the authority of the county. And sometimes that creates a lot of complication because there's a lot of oversight, and sometimes it leaves pretty significant gaps when we think about how the system, the scientific system, is being managed. And so I think the biggest challenge going forward, and I'm sure something that we'll touch on from all of our different perspectives, is how do we manage the system in a way that benefits everybody who's enjoying it? And that is old hill country landowners that are many multi-generations that I've spoken to. It's newcomers to the area. It's San Antonio citizens. And it's nature itself. I mean, I feel like we do have to say that without nature and ecosystems, we're done. We need them as much as they need us to sort of pay attention. So I guess that's my overview. Is this your mic too? Do you want to hear? I'll just
Is that okay?
Yeah, no, it doesn't bother me. Cool.
All right, well, thank you so much, Lindsay, and to the San Antonio Report for having me. My name is Catherine Romans. I'm the Executive Director of the Hill Country Alliance, and I would commend you all for pulling together a panel that really shows the multidisciplinary approach that's required for considering growth and drought in our region. So we've heard from a developer, we've heard from the university and legal perspective, and I bring the nonprofit perspective. The Hill Country Alliance has been around for just about 20 years now, thinking about growth and natural resources in our region. We were started by a group of landowners and neighbors outside of Austin in the Bee Cave area who came together concerned about what they were seeing kind of growing out from Austin in terms of really unplanned and largely unmanaged growth. And from those neighborhood conversations about how do we protect our creeks and our rivers, our night skies, and our beautiful scenic hilltops, the Hill Country Alliance as an organization has grown to now working across 17 counties of Central Texas. So we're based in Dripping Springs. We work all the way down the I-35 corridor from Austin to San Antonio, and then really all the way west to Uvalde, Edwards County, and Rock Springs, up to Junction and kind of our northwestern expanse. And so we are all about bringing folks together in conversations like this to talk about how we grow as a region while protecting the very things that define us as a community and as a part of the state of Texas. And perhaps first and foremost is our water resources when we're talking about things that make the Hill Country so unique. It's the headwaters of 12 of Texas's rivers happen right here in that central Texas pool. All love to live in this part of Texas. As Amy kind of mentioned, we get to brag in the Hill Country. We have the kind of both the blessing and the curse of having all of the water challenges that you can think of in not only the state of Texas, but in the country in terms of prolonged drought. The drought is no stranger and nothing new to the Hill Country. This is a region that has experienced drought much worse than we have seen in recorded history. All the way to catastrophic flooding. We know that we are looking at getting more flood events, more acute flooding in the Hill Country. And so we're now seeing a system of prolonged drought interrupted by catastrophic flood back to prolonged drought. When you add on top of that the boom in population, the increasing demand on our water resources, and what that brings with it. It's more driveways, more impervious cover, the impacts to water quality that brings. It's more wastewater. How we deal with and manage wastewater in a region that is known for its pristine streams is a huge challenge that we just have to grapple with as a region. Drought is very prominently featured in the title of this program, and so I think it is worth stating up front that last year, 2022, was one of the most acute years of drought that our region has seen in recorded history. And while we have had some blessed rains in the last few weeks, we are not out of drought. It takes a long time for our aquifers to recover, particularly the Trinity Aquifer. And so I just checked the U.S. Drought Monitor map this morning before leaving my house. There are still significant parts of the Hill Country that are in exceptional drought. And those places in Kendall County and Bandera are upstream from San Antonio. To the question of why talk about the Hill Country when we're here in San Antonio, that's our water supply up there. That's the contributing zone to the Edwards Aquifer. And so it's really important to be talking about these issues now while we're in drought, but to keep that conversation going even as we start seeing some rain. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Also, thank you for having us, San Antonio Report, for putting this panel discussion on. You know, as I was thinking about being here, and I thought 25 years ago, the Edwards Aquifer Authority would not be represented on any kind of discussion like this because, for a number of reasons, but one of them being that 25 years ago, issues around the Edwards were so contentious and driven by conflict and disagreement. We're not there anymore, and we're not there anymore in part because political leaders back at the time, back in the early 90s, they did something and they got it right, and that is they created the Edwards Aquifer Authority Act. And that's our statute that enabled the creation of our agency. And so now we have an agency that for the past quarter of a century has been managing the Edwards within a regulatory structure that really did an about-face against the rule of capture that existed around the state at the time. And it still exists everywhere else in the state. But we found a way, our legislators found a way to find a niche for this region, for this resource, because of its unique characteristics, the nexus to endangered species and all that. That's all part of our history. All that to say that we were born out of a lot of conflict, litigation that led to our creation. And so I've been with the agency now for 17 years, 11 of those years as its general manager. And the lessons learned from all that time has been that we don't have to live in the conflict if we choose not to. What I mean by that is if you look at the hill country, you look all around us, you look at the groundwater issues around the state, our inclination has been historically to draw our line in the sand and pick a side and then go to court. And we spend a lot of money litigating issues. My opinion is that if we were to put our brain power together into good use and work together on solutions that work to the benefit of everyone, that we could spend more of our resources investing in the natural resources and come up with solutions that actually are helpful in the long term. So while we don't, as an agency, we're limited in our ability to regulate. We regulate solely the Edwards Aquifer and the Edwards Aquifer alone. That's how we were set up. And to Amy's point, in Texas, we like to draw those lines of distinction very narrowly, and so that's just what we live within. And so we don't have any regulatory powers that extend up into the Texas Hill Country, and we get pressed sometimes when issues come up. People look to us and want us to do something more than we're capable of doing. And so what it's led us to is to not necessarily take that role, but to take a role of being a resource, a facilitator. Someone mentioned wastewater treatment plants and discharges. We hear a lot about quarry development. We hear about just development in general. And there is a void, I think, in having the right protective measures from a regulatory perspective to take care of those things. So we're left with some other ways to go about it, I think. And most of them go back to trying to find market-based solutions on how you can get there. If we learned anything in the Edwards was that the regulatory program that was given to us by the state created a market-based system in the Edwards that has worked really well over the past 25 years. We now have a process, a permitting system that has led to a tremendous conservation ethic across the Edwards region because the permitting system monetized the value of conservation in a way that was real to people that they felt in their pocketbook. And so I think there's similar opportunities to be had if we're willing to work together in identifying how we can help nature do its best in the face of the needs for the population growth. And so I guess my last comment will be that oftentimes in the past, economic development has fought with environmental protection, and I think there's an opportunity for those two to come together and do something different, be a little more innovative, creative, imaginative, and inclusive around those issues rather than just fight with each other.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andra Wiesian, and I'm a Kendall County Commissioner for Precinct 2. Thank you, Lindsay, for having me. as a former media person in broadcast journalism, I really appreciate what you all do, and I think you've got a great business model. So my background, other than media, is ranching. I grew up in South Texas in DeWitt County, where we had a lot more water than we do in Kendall County. So I've always felt that I've been a conservationist and a steward, because that's what ranchers do. I ran for county commissioner in part to help protect our water resources in Kendall County. I had the great opportunity to serve on the Guadalupe Blanco River Authority Board, appointed by Governor Abbott, and I got to do that for 21 months, and unfortunately had to get off when I became county commissioner. But I've always had a passion for water resources, and we do really have an issue in Kendall County. My job is not really to regulate water resources, but we do have to, because that's one of the things that we're facing. It's a finite resource in Kendall County. And as Lindsay said, so many people want to come to the beautiful Texas Hill Country. We came up as kids and went to camp and swam in the pristine springs that you all have been talking about, but it is a finite resource. And we are facing a population growth. I think 176% we've increased. We're the 5th fastest growing county in the nation, not just in Texas. And everybody wants to come there, and that's great. I'm glad that Texas is booming. I wouldn't want Texans to be in a depression, but unfortunately we have a finite resource. And it's not just that the drawdown of the well from the overpumping because of the population increase, it's all contamination of our water resources and then flooding as well. So as a county commissioner, these are the issues I face, with very few tools in the toolbox to tackle these issues. And that's something that we can talk about as well, what we're going to do in the future, for legislation. So that's my intro, and then I guess we'll move on down.
So my first question goes to you, Amy. What are some of the laws that are already in place to protect our water sources in Texas, and how are those limited today?
How much time do I have? So I'm just going to focus on groundwater, because we can talk for a long time about surface water, which is slightly different. But in Texas, I think most people might be familiar, we have the right of capture, which essentially was reaffirmed in 2012 by the Texas Supreme Court, that essentially says law of the biggest pump. Now, obviously, with Roland sitting here, we know that there are some exceptions to that. That is, in some places in Texas, modified by groundwater conservation districts, which, interestingly, the authority to create a groundwater district was allowed through the Conservation Amendment in do you know the date? I can never remember, 1906 or something like that? Right after a drought, because that's how we always do it in Texas. Every drought, you'll see there was water legislation that was passed this week, right after a drought. This is not all that to say it's not a new conversation in Texas. Even when there were many, many fewer people, there was a recognition that we were always going to be in this kind of water boom bust scenario. So the groundwater districts are ground up, sort of grassroots opportunities for local folks to regulate the groundwater the way that they want to. The Edwards is obviously an exception to that, because that is legislatively created. And I'm not here to advocate for litigation, but I do think it's worth noting there would be no Edwards Aquifer Authority if the Sierra Club had not brought litigation. So it was not a choice. Nobody came together for that to happen. A federal judge said, do it, or I'm coming for you. And note, I think that might have been the fastest moving litigation ever in Texas. So even way back then, we did not want the feds telling us what to do. So we suddenly got very, very motivated. I think it has been extremely successful. One of the things I'll just highlight on the Edwards, since we're in this area, is I think one of the reasons why the Edwards does create such an excellent market is there is a cap. And I know that makes everybody uncomfortable, but you can't value something unless it's somewhat limited. I mean, this is a straight supply-demand situation. When you have folks able to pump in an unregulated way, it makes markets very difficult. So I am a pro-markets person, but there may have to be some regulations in order for that to happen. So that's kind of the big picture. Of course, there's a lot of environmental laws that end up actually giving more opportunities than straight water law. So I mentioned the Edwards Aquifer litigation, the Sierra Club litigation. That was actually an endangered species litigation because there was no Texas law on which to bring a claim. So it was actually the impact of the species at the springs. So that's always a big one that's in the room. Water quality issues, you mentioned the wastewater challenges that are happening. Those wastewater discharge permits are all through the Clean Water Act, which is administered by our state agency, the TCEQ. But to be honest, there's not much. There are, I'm sure we'll get into this more, there are, county authority regulations. I will just plant the seed because I think we've already sort of mentioned it in a big picture way. To me, the biggest tool that is available is not trying to sue under some water law. It's actually land use. So it's land use opportunities, the way we manage the land, the way we subdivide it, the amount of impervious cover. These are really the things. The way we grow is what's going to make the difference. It's not water law, which is a bummer for me, but that's okay. I'll just keep bringing up baby lawyers. And for all these years, people say, "Oh, you do water? That must be, it must be so busy." I'm like, you'd be surprised how little litigation there is because we don't really have that many regulations. So that's an overview, I think.
Roland, would you like to add to that? Tell us a little bit about what the Edwards Aquifer Authority can manage and where y'all's line is.
Yeah, thank you. And it's Amy's absolutely right. There are about 100 different groundwater conservation districts around the state of Texas, and most, if not all of those, are governed along county line. You stop at the county line, that's where it ends. We know that groundwater aquifers do not end at county lines. They don't recognize political subdivision. What makes the Edwards unique is that as much as you could, we are positioned in a way to manage an actual, not the entire aquifer, but a segment of the aquifer. So we cross 8 counties from Uvalde County to the west all the way to Hays County, moving east and north. And wherever there's Edwards within that jurisdiction, we regulate. And you're required to have a permit if you're going to withdraw water from that aquifer. That's quite different from any place else in the state. And the nexus to that is there's a nexus to the endangered species that allowed for that heavy lift to happen within this region. And Amy's right, the litigation at the time was, as most litigation is, quite controversial, and it was kind of pitting critter versus man, species versus human. But what we've learned over time is that in spite of our origins and all that conflict and division, the system has proven itself to be good for everyone. Everyone's benefited now, and the value lies in that. I think there's a greater understanding now, not just of how the Edwards works or what it is, but that taking care of it, protecting it, managing it right, helps everyone. Every use and every user of the system from the west to the east is invested in that. And so we went from me and mine to now it's we. And we still have those little scuffles, I guess, every now and then over parts of that. But as we look to the future, there's been a tremendous amount of work and investment into securing the quantity available out of the Edwards. And there is a cap on how much is available, legislative cap. 572,000 acre feet is available every year to be used from this resource. We've never gotten to that cap, by the way. We never even got close. So that, coupled with our drought management tools, our critical period management reductions, where as the aquifer levels decline, we restrict our permit holders on how much of their permits available to them. All that has helped kind of secure that as a resource. The unknown, I think, moving forward is what will the stresses be to the watershed of the aquifer, which is the Texas Hill Country. The water that's in the aquifer, in the artesian part of the aquifer, comes from the hill country. As water accumulates and fills those streams and percolates through the ground up there, it ends up in the Edwards. Some of it ends up in the Trinity, and we know that the Trinity and the Edwards are interconnected. There's communication there, if you will. And so the Trinity recharges the Edwards to some degree. So the uncertainties are there about what happens if historic recharge is somehow compromised in terms of quantity and quality. And so while we don't have, our jurisdictional footprint, our ends at county lines at the northern part of Uvalde, Medina, Bexar County, and it doesn't even go to the full length of Coronado and Hays County as you move east. But so we don't have that regulatory power that extends beyond that. And prompted us to think about, okay, what can we do? We have a tremendous history of lessons learned and experience in working with people to accommodate different interests and stakeholder groups. And it seems like we could put that to good use to try to stretch ourselves into what can be done up in the watershed. And so a few years ago, we decided we needed to develop a nonprofit of our own, a support organization, the Edwards Aquifer Conservancy, in part to open ourselves up to more partnership, to more resources, and to be able to work with people in a way that maybe a regulatory agency can't. And so we have the Conservancy now that's kind of carrying a lot of that work for us. We've worked very closely with the City of San Antonio on their Edwards Aquifer Protection Program as a partner with them as they've secured lands on the recharge and contributing zone. And our vision is that we'd like to replicate a lot of that work in the future in places where it hasn't happened. And for the region, that is points east of Cibolo Creek, east of Bexar County. You're talking about Comal, Hayes County, and points north that's in the watershed to the Edwards. And I think there's an opportunity there for us to work in a different way. And I mentioned market-based, incentivized opportunities that are out there. I think there's an opportunity to work with private industry, with corporate America, who's looking to improve their footprint, their environmental footprint. And I think the Hill Country is ripe for that at this point. So that's kind of where we are positioning ourselves, to be a resource. Not that we have all the answers, we can't have all the answers, but we can be a partner, we can be a player, we can be a resource based on what we know about the Edwards, and some of the lessons learned in trying to bring people together around issues that have been contentious in the past.
Charlie, on that note, I want to jump off and talk to you a little bit about what partnerships can look like in the future. So Roland mentioned partnerships between private and government. I want to see, he wants to see more of that. What can private industry do to be a part of those conversations?
First, I think it's good to have forums like this. I think somebody mentioned when we were having a visit about this last week, too often the topic is, the different parties stick to their corner and there's the battle line and nobody talks, or it's all on social media where nobody really has a collaborative conversation. So I think it starts with bringing what you might consider opposing sides into a room and talking about it. We look at it as, we're part of we live in the Kendall County. We understand the water resource is very finite and the impacts that we can have on the environment. So we want to be part of that conversation, even though we're on the private side of that conversation. I think that one comment I would have in terms of, it may not answer your question perfectly, but one comment I would have is, I think more and more needs to be thought about from the policy level, whether it's statewide or federal, but from the policy level, utilizing carrot as opposed to the stick approach. It's very easy when policymakers get together to think of the only solution is a new regulation, a tighter regulation, something like that. I think we're seeing it a little more now, more of a carrot approach, whether it be funds set aside for the state to acquire land and put it into park and open space. I think if policymakers and the community and the public better understand that from the development community, even though it's always perceived by the public that hey, if we impose more restrictive regulation, that's going to solve the problem, it may not. It really may not, and it may create unintended consequences when that developer is planning, whether it be a community or commercial project, may create unintended consequences in that it could, the costs of that community could go up to be developed, and that could take away funds that were planned for that development for other things that are more beneficial to the environment. And so I think if the problem of conserving water resources, minimizing density of developments is thought about from the standpoint of how can we look at this through the eyes of the development community, and they're looking at it, and oftentimes it actually starts with the landowner before a developer becomes involved. If the policies continue to get so overly restrictive that it's actually impacting, say, a multi-generational ranch family, that's not good. That's not good for the general public. Forget a developer. That's not good for the general public. So I guess I just think that more thought needs to be put into how can we create policies that are approaching the issues with more of a carrot approach.
Andrew, I want to kind of jump off from there. What do you want to see from the public side in those conversations?
Well, I appreciate Charlie's comment, and he really is a great developer. We appreciate that. They had the foresight to get that GBRA water, so they're not using groundwater. But we've done some creative things in Kendall County. We recently, with the help of Hill Country Alliance, passed a bond, a $20 million bond, and I believe it passed 67% in our November election. And that's to take that $20 million and hopefully leverage it with some grant money and set aside some land in Kendall County, particularly some sensitive recharge areas. We're also starting to have those conversations about nature conservancy, land conservancy with legacy ranchers, people that have had the land in their families for 5 and 7 generations, came here from Germany, and really getting them to think about what do you want your legacy to be, rather than maybe trying to develop this but setting it aside, or even talking about some covenants, conditions, and restrictions, something just to think about the future and not automatically develop it. So that's one thing. The other thing, we've taken some public money and we're putting toward monitor wells. We have a Cow Creek Groundwater Conservation District in Kendall County, and so the more wells that we can drill, the more that we will know what's going on, and to Amy's background, have that real science and get to that desired future conditions by some real data. So those are some of the things that we're doing, and I can talk about state legislature, but I think that'll be the next topic.
Catherine, where does nonprofit fit in between that partnership?
Yeah, thank you. And I think going from your comments, Charlie, to the commissioner is really a great juxtaposition. And I think you're absolutely right. We have to use carrots. In some places, we may need a few more sticks. But as you all probably know, in Texas, and Texas is unique in giving very few tools to counties to plan for, direct, and manage growth. Outside of incorporated cities, there's really not a whole lot that the county commissioners court can do. And so Kendall County is a great example of a county that's trying to think creatively about how to create new resources to drive the type of growth that you want to see for your community. It's easy to talk about growth in terms of wringing our hands about raw numbers and millions of people and the stressors that puts on our region. And as a commissioner in Comal County reminded me and an audience of Hill Country Alliance folks at an event a couple of years ago, these are moms and dads and families, and we want to see and welcome new contributing members of the Hill Country community and build the fabric of this region. So how we make sure that growth happens in a way that doesn't undermine the very things that draw us here in the first place is just really important. The Hill Country Alliance is just one nonprofit organization in this region that is working to hold up the good examples, to elevate the good ideas, things like conservation bond measures, like innovative technologies here, the Devil's River Conservancy, the Friends of Hondo Canyon. There are hundreds of nonprofits working from very locally focused on a small community in the Hill Country to regional to statewide and even international. And so there's a great wealth of expertise in the nonprofit community. And oftentimes nonprofits to direct growth in a more concise and consistent way across the region. We may get a chance to talk about this, but it bears mentioning that it feels like we are best in land we have today is going further. And so there's been some great activity at the legislature this legislative session. We've been trying to elevate that opportunities like they did in Kendall County to really invest in conservation now so that we're not, sitting here 25 or 50 years from now saying, gosh, I wish we had done something back in 2023 when it felt like there was an opportunity. So the fact that we're having this conversation now is really, we need to be talking about this more and taking
often has to be the gatehouse for development. Talk to me about what.
I'm not speaking as a SAWS. No, this is just me talking. I don't think I'm going to say any time to be sitting on the SAWS board watching sort of the development, see where the growth is going. And one of the more recent conflicts we've had is the sort of, do we side of our authority and, this idea of boundary if we're in unincorporated Kendall County or even to the south of San Antonio. And so we've had a lot of conversations about, do we want to be in areas where we can't sort of enforce this conservation, this idea of conservation ethic, and can we sort of force people to fix their leaky pipes and things like that? So I'll just make a quick general comment, and then I don't want to, I think the counties need to, and I think they are, these counties that are, first I think we need to think about, when I think about county authority, I'm thinking about counties that are bounding large cities and getting greatly impacted by that growth. Texas is huge, and we have a lot of counties that don't really need any authority at the moment of the type that we're talking about. So I think all of this should be narrowly tailored to the areas where there's this desire. So you mentioned Kendall County, I think is the fifth. I remember one time I saw a list and it was Hayes, Comal, and Kendall were all on the top 10 list. It was just jarring to think about. So if you look at it as sort of a halo above San Antonio or between San Antonio and Austin, it's a lot. My general comment quickly is, when we think about this idea of carrot and the sticks, I think the way that we talk about regulation, how one defines regulation is really critical to that discussion because obviously it's sensitive. The way I think of regulation is sort of what we've seen in the Edwards. It creates the guardrails, right? It's the intended outcome or the desired outcome. Within those boundaries, you have conversations, you have opportunities for markets. But one of the things that I've seen over the last sort of decade, particularly after the Day decision, is the property owners that get the most attention that are saying that their property rights are being impacted are the ones in groundwater districts that want to pull out the water and from a development standpoint that want to develop. But I get lots of phone calls with the group that you were talking about, which is the folks that say, I don't want to subdivide and my property is getting greatly impacted by what's happening around me. So I think if we're going to talk about property rights, we have to sort of make everybody on equal playing field and realize that the decisions, we are all related. We are a community when it comes to natural resources. So the decisions of one landowner do greatly affect the decisions of others. And so I'm sure later we'll get to this idea of deed restrictions, which you mentioned, which I think are important. It's just strange to me that the people who want to conserve are having to sort of use these other legal tools because our current system doesn't protect it. So none of that answers the question that you're asking. So, I would sort of kick it to the county. I'd be very interested to say, but we are having so much growth that maybe wasn't predicted at these levels outside of cities. So they're in these unincorporated zoning areas. So, some level of increased zoning, I don't mean to say, these sort of setbacks and things like that, but maybe more about lot sizes and maybe more about impervious cover, and maybe we don't need out in the hill country sprinklers automatically put in, particularly in the front yard where nobody is. These are the types of things that regulation can assist, that we're using the water in the best way possible, that the houses that are being built are complementary to the environment and not in contention with the environment. So, but I'll kick it to you to how y'all.
Andrew, did you want to add? Yeah, respond.
No, those are great points, Amy. And I like the fact that we should try to use carrots and rather than the sticks. And one thing is conservation. As my friend Jonathan Stinson over here at GBRA said, conservation is the next new water source. And how long have we been hearing that? Charlie is talking about more conservation measures in Cordillera. I'm working with the City Council in Fair Oaks, the same thing. My family can capture 60,000 gallons of rainwater at our 10-acre property in Kendall County, so this can all be done. But one of the things, and it's kind of an icky thing if you're not into politics, but I am, is that we have so much pressure from the city of Bernie, or we did, things are changing, through a WICID, a WCID, a development came out that extended from the city of Bernie GBRA water, which was really for kind of a slow inherent growth in Kendall County, and not just all of a sudden 800 houses in the middle of the county that's not in the ETJ, it's in the unincorporated area. And so we had a big change. The mayor's gone, we have a new city council person, and so we are very aware in Kendall County. We've had 3 new commissioners, the judge and 2 commissioners come in. So I think from that aspect, this grassroots of talking, having these conversations and saying, if you don't like what the leadership is doing, you got to change it. I'm friends with Senator Campbell, and I can tell you she's not going to do anything at that level right now, because to Amy's point, not every county needs regulation, and we have to be very careful of what we ask for. The Bullis bill that we launched from Kendall County didn't get anywhere, and one of my conservative constituents said, well, if you read this could be interpreted as if you owned river property, you might not be able to enjoy the recreation or graze your cattle. So it's a double-edged sword. You have to be careful for what you ask for. One thing is, like, thank the Lord that we didn't have any new WICIDs come, because that's what formed George's Ranch. I have to pick on the outlet group. I'm sorry, I'm probably going to get crucified after this forum, but I just can't help it anymore. But a WCID doesn't bring a water source. And it's like, oh, we're going to get water from XYZ company. It's like, well, XYZ company doesn't have any water. I mean, this is a finite resource. This is not a virtual video game. And so there's no oversight with the WCIDs. And I think there's some movement on some legislators' parts to really look at these and think about special districts, the PUDs and the PIDs and the MUDs and, all of that in the future. And so that's one of my pet peeves. And I don't know if I answered your question, but thank you for letting me get that out.
I just want to say, I mean, you just rattled off a bunch of acronyms that I think are very important. I mean, it's funny, but it's also true. I mean, there are so many. You do not want to do utility law in Texas. People will ask me questions. I say, oh, I'm not touching it. We have so many different types of entities, and that can really create, I think, a lot of problems, particularly as they interact with the county. I mean, some of them have eminent domain authority. I mean, it's a bit of a mess. So cleaning that up, if I had a magic wand, I probably would do that.
Talking a little bit about the carrot and the stick, Charlie, what kind of carrots would you like to see more often and be used by either the county or a city entity or at the state level?
I guess what I was trying to emphasize is that the type of carrots would be funds from the state that can, and like the Kendall County just passed the $20 million bond to go acquire property to conserve. At the end of the day, the way I see it, and just take the developer hat off, just a citizen in the public in Kendall County in the state of Texas, is the family that has 100 acres or 500 acres or 1,000 acres that they got from their grandfather. They have a right to that asset and what is done with it. And when I try to simplify it down and say if it's for the good of the public, which I all believe that preserving the water and doing everything we can as a state to manage that issue, if that's for the good of the public, then the public, the state, the Fed, a public agency should be involved in accommodating them in some way for a devaluation of their asset, if a devaluation is coming in the form of some highly restrictive regulation. So that's a simplistic way of kind of analyzing through that problem, taking the developer out of it. It's that some family owns that land. And so I'm not saying we need to go buy everybody's land up in the state of Texas to keep it from being developed, and you're hearing more and more about this. We were talking about that at our table at lunch today. Bills at the state legislature aimed specifically at allocating funds for the state to preserve large tracts of land, for the good of the public. That's kind of one of my approaches to it.
Roland, how do you balance the different pieces? Y'all oversee multiple counties, so how do y'all kind of balance all of those?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's about the resource, right? You're managing the resource, and irrespective of the political subdivision that exists, that overlays it. One of the things I think that helps balance it, and I think it's been overlooked in our discussion so far, and that is that in many respects, science should lead the way. Not politics, but science. And that's what I see that the EAA has been able to do, is we've built a tremendous database of scientific data about the resource, and we know more about it today than we did a generation ago, and a generation from now we'll know even more. But I don't think we can lose sight of the importance of science in that process, because we can go to the state legislature, we can go into the courtroom, and we can plead our case based on emotion, based on feeling, based on how it impacts my personal pocketbook. But science is the equalizer in many respects. Or it's the truth serum, if you will. And I think it's important that we invest equally in the science part of the equation, because that ultimately will lead to better policy. And that takes time. So a lot of what we're talking about is legacy building. We're fortunate that we've had a legacy already established with our programming, but there's more to be done. And so we're looking at the next generation of our mission of expanding that legacy. And we always say that science has to lead the way. So when you talk about carrots and sticks, science will support either the carrot or the stick or both, but I think it's important to not lose sight of that.
We just wrapped a legislative session. Where do you guys feel like the gaps still exist? So we got some money for infrastructure, right? But what else? What other gaps are there, and how can we kind of fill those?
Well, that's a good question, but I think we start having these conversations now, and I wasn't a county commissioner last year, and I am this year, and so not that I know anything now after 4 months, but I think we have to have the conversations now with, as Roland said, being attuned to the economic interests as well, because Texas is a private property state, as somebody once said, is if you like the view, buy it. So these hard conversations, we're going to have to sit down and start having them now, so that in 2 years we know what to do, not just wait till a month before the legislature meets and try to rush something through. It's not going to be easy, but we're Texans and we're going to work together and get this done.
Did anyone else want to add to that?
Oh, yeah. Do you want to tag team it? Yeah. It was an interesting session when it came to water. Many of you may know there was, I don't know if we call it an omnibus bill, but there was a big water bill that passed Senator Perry's and Representative King's co-sponsored bill. One of the things that it's sort of in three parts. The first one is, and I'm going to use air quotes here because I can't stop myself, but bringing some of this budget surplus for new water, which I love the video game. I sort of feel that way. Like, there's no such thing as new water. Like, let's not talk about it like that. But anyways, it's in there. And then the second third is to give rural areas and counties some money for infrastructure, which is fantastic. And I think it complements what we're seeing on the federal level. If you look at the amount of money that has been put into federal roads over the last decade, and then you look at the federal funding that has been put towards water infrastructure, it's alarming that we've just saddled states and local communities, right? San Antonio ratepayers, we pay for all those pipes. None of that comes through assistance for the federal government. So I think on the stick part, but also on just let's get down there and fix some stuff, the water leak, water loss. And then the third part of the bill was water loss, which I think there's a lot more to that. A couple of pieces about the bill that I think did not happen that could happen. The focus was really on rural, and I think that's great. Unfortunately, when you look at water loss and the opportunities to bring back some lost water, cities is where it's at. There's some really good reports out there quantifying how much San Antonio, Austin, Houston could recover if we had funding for sort of water leak fixes. That did not come from Senate Bill 28. And I do think from an education standpoint, this idea of new water, I think we need to be careful. It's easy. We love to build our way out of things. It is part of our ethos, not just as Texans, but maybe as Americans. We're not going to just build our way out of this. We have to fundamentally change how we look at water, and we are on that trajectory. So the danger of saying, well, we're just going to build a pipeline from the ocean is nobody is going to be able to pay for that. So your affordability customers are going to go from this many to this many. We don't have the power infrastructure to actually build these things. I mean, we would have to build some additional energy plants. So, for me, is there going to have to be new construction? Absolutely. I would love for future legislation to kind of shift from that. The bucket of money is there. But it is a complement. It has to be a complement. We've seen across the United States examples where large projects, desal and others, were built. The minute the price tag came in, the bills started going up, people started conserving, and now they've mothballed the plant that they still owe debt service to. We cannot put ourselves in that position. That there is an economic piece to building new supply that really makes conservation as a new water supply look very, very pretty. Alone, it's not going to work, but there's a lot more that we could be doing. I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, maybe I'll just chime in by saying there were some really big price tag victories at the legislative session this year. The water infrastructure funding is a huge step in the right direction, and we've gotten questions about why is a conservation organization concerned about water infrastructure, and it gets to, if our infrastructure is up to date, state of the art, it's maximizing every drop. That means more water in the creeks and rivers for the environment. It means more water for future generations of Texans. So it's important. Charlie, kind of referenced the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department Centennial Parks Fund, another huge victory that all of us as Texans will hopefully get to vote on this November. To set aside $1 billion for the creation of new state parks. And as we grow as a state, we're becoming more and more urban. And so it's critical that we find ways to connect urban populations with the natural environment, including in the Hill Country, where we have the most over-visited state parks in the entire system. So another huge victory there. I'll just add, though, there were some missed opportunities. I think the opportunity to put more funding towards studying our groundwater and surface water connection was something that unfortunately didn't gain a lot of traction in the legislature. Protections for pristine streams, which has been a legislative effort in years past, have not moved forward. So that's, I think, a missed opportunity, particularly here in the Hill Country. And I don't want to take away from the fact that when it comes to water, yes, we're going to need the $1 billion solutions that look at major projects, but we're also going to need to think much more locally. I think, allude on our front yards to water our lawns, that it's absurd. And so serving water, to be thinking responsibly about our water resources, to be encouraging our neighbors to do the same, to be having conversations with our elected officials. And I'll just commend Kendall County again and local officials across the region who really are filling some of the voids that are created when we don't have stronger statewide leadership at the legislature for funding groundwater science or for thinking about how to manage regard.
Well, unfortunately, our hour is coming to a close, guys. I appreciate you guys all being here. I wanted to give you each a chance to give some closing thoughts, so we can start with Jerry.
Thank you. I think if I could lead with anything, it's like any profession, not contrary to popular belief, not all developers are evil, bad guys. We I know as a company and in this particular community, Cordia Ranch, the mission statement was be good stewards of the land. So you can have all the regulation in the world you want, you can have carrots and sticks and all that, but it does take a mindset, and I think you're going to find more of that with native Texans that may have a mindset that we can be part of the solution. And in the case of Cordia Ranch, when it's developed out, our bringing in the surface water supply to serve the balance of the community will end up preserving or conserving or saving 500 million gallons of water a year over the land that the 9,000 acres that is our development that could have otherwise been developed via wells. And so I think part of that's just educating the public and starting it at younger ages. I've got kids, and I hear it more and more from that demographic, definitely than when I was a kid. They're more conscious of it. So I think the more we can do with those kind of things, it'll help next generations. So.
Yeah, I'll just kind of pick up on that last comment. I mean, that's absolutely where was the first water I ever had. I don't think most people can say probably where they sourced the first water that they had. So maybe, it's epigenetic or something. I was sort of coming of age during the catfish farm fight, all this. And so San Antonio made this, as a result of this litigation, a very concerted effort that, we have at the news every day or on the back of the paper. They announce the aquifer level. And I don't know why that does not happen everywhere, right? There's no reason. It's always weird for me when I go to other cities and say, where do you get your water? They actually can't say that. That should not be true anywhere, period, right? So I do think education is huge at all levels. The kids are the ones that are going to push us, but the legislatures also sometimes need some conversations about, I see what you're trying to do, but scientifically, that actually doesn't work. So when I worked as a nonprofit advocate, I said I was a translator for science for legislation or for policy. So I think that there's a piece of that. And I do, as you see here, I think this panel is a great representation of the different types of people that are all working in this space. And we all do work together. It's one of the things I love about working in water is it's nonpartisan, and oddly, it's one of the least siloed things, even when it seems like it is. But we have realized that we can't do this on our own. So, most of us know each other. It's a small community, but we need to be bringing in. And I think one of the things, the last thing I'll say is we are getting a lot of new people moving here, right? We've talked a lot. I think almost everybody's made a comment about Texans and Texas culture, but the reality is a lot of people are coming here that do not have that history. They are not multi-generational. They didn't swim in those rivers as a kid. They don't have this sense of place that I think is, for all of us, very seeped. And it is our task to talk to them about how we do things and how we want to do things going forward. So you can buy it, we will welcome you, but you are joining our community, and that comes with, I think, some water conservation ethos and sort of other things of that nature.
Well, I'll just thank you again for having me and echo, I think this panel has had a lot of great ideas, and there's both challenges and opportunities ahead. When the Hill Country Alliance has been a part of polling across the region, universally across the board, water is one of the most important things that is on folks' minds, and it's not just because of the drought, but it's because people see the critical importance of water to the fabric of our lives in the Hill Country, to the future of our economic stability, to the growth that we are seeing as a region. And so I think we should all have confidence in the fact that people get it, they understand it, and it's just a matter of finding the ways to enshrine a protection of our water resources as we grow as a region. We are really fortunate at the Hill Country Alliance to be a part of a collaboration of a bunch of nonprofits and universities and agencies that are all working together to kind of raise awareness about these issues and hold up those good examples, which I think we have in spades across the region. It's just a matter of making those good examples the norm of how we do business. This park, this facility is a great example. I saw low impact development signs in the parking lot as we're walking in. This should be how we build across the board in this region with a respect to the longevity of our water resources. So there's great work happening. It's just a matter of scaling up, I think.
I would just close by saying, I think a word that comes to mind, I'll call it a value, and that's sustainability. I think for us, in taking care of the Edwards, our goal is sustainability of the resource over time for generations to come. But I think that's also the goal of development, is sustainability. And so that's where the two diametrically, sometimes historically opposed issues come together around sustainability. And overlaying that is people. And so I've told people over the past several years that you may not think of us this way as a regulatory agency, but we're in the people business. Everything we do affects people. And all these concerns that have been shared here is all really, at the end of the day, about people. So we have to go back to that and think about the issues that way, people. And so the more we open ourselves to bring people in, to have the conversations like we're doing today, I think the better off we'll be long term.
So in closing, just a little bit about my background. I've worked with the Kendall County 4-H youth for the last 20 years, and I still do. And one of the things that we've taught them is where their food and fiber comes from. And someone said, where does our water come from? Well, from the tap. Yeah. And milk comes from HEB. And so that's one of the ways that I've given back to kids to really teach them that. And you all can do that too, because we all know children, and we know young people, and we can bring them up right in that respect. But the other thing is just thank you for being here. Thank you for being engaged and coming here and caring enough to carry this message to others. And so I want to thank Lindsay again for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Panelists, thank you guys so much for joining today. I'm really excited to have y'all here. It was a great panel.